Hi, we'll be discussing education as a soft power used by China and how this is an argument against big China in this video. So, we'll be touching on what education is as a soft power and how it manifests in Southeast Asia, and what possible neo-realist, liberal, and constructivist perspectives may look like. And all these will serve to show how China is most definitely not on the downward slope, hence big China is wrong. So first, we'll define how higher education works as a soft power. So soft power creates a congenial environment that is friendly and collaborative, which is often used to solve domestic, regional, and global problems. Higher education can be and has been used to develop soft power. Educational institutions tend to lead efforts to create collaboration and spread culture through higher education and research. Historically, the US has been long propagating education as a soft power instrument, among other means. They've used it to spread ideas worldwide and affect intellectual and scientific progress. This has since created a hierarchical system in the educational community, producing inequality between some countries. So from this quote I have from Bharadwaj and Kumar, it basically states that higher education may become the new center or focus of diplomacy because of its sheer influence as the international order begins to change. So for some background, in Southeast Asia, most educational internationalization in Southeast Asia happens through regionalization and organizations such as ASEAN and APEC. These have helped to foster economic and educational competitiveness in these countries. They've also challenged national values and cultures, which also force countries to develop and diversify in response. Education is a driving factor of development within the region. With such a powerful tool, China has since used it to extend its regional influence over Southeast Asia. This can be seen through the establishment of Confucius Institutes, and partnerships and scholarships, and even through China's BRI. There's also proposed mechanisms for higher education such as quality assurance, accreditation, credit transfer, and qualification recognition. So why develop education in Southeast Asia? By introducing tier specializations and research and exchange opportunities, you allow the propagation of ideas, domestic, regional, or international cooperation as well. And you can afford to exchange culture, and in doing so, you can problem solve and build important relationships with the other. So why is developing education with China good for a Southeast Asian global South country? And for the same reason that developing your education sector with any other able country is good, except that China has also been touting equity as a major goal, to provide higher education for the masses. Increasing equity is a chance for many to make a living, to have a voice, and to have an equitable opportunity, not just to survive, but to thrive in the modern economy. The second, to guard against external systemic forces. So the internationalization of higher education has become more prone to the patterns of globalization, which has tended to benefit the few and alienate the many. In the eyes of the poorer regions and countries, education is an opportunity to break free from these exclusionary patterns and develop themselves with support from a friendly regional giant. Lastly, it's simply an opportunity for growth. The opportunity to develop your economy and human resource in such agreements has far-reaching benefits for the short term and the long term. The country would be foolish to give this up entirely. So with these developmental opportunities available to countries in Southeast Asia, China is well positioned to use soft power to alter the international order without open conflict. So as for our discussion of how education is an argument against big China. So what is big China? Big China refers to how China's growth has been slowing in recent years. Its rise has seemed to taper off as the country also begins to face certain pressures. Some Western countries have experienced a similar pattern of declining growth, and they have associated it with a decrease in authority and status. If China begins to experience a stumbling block in its rapid rise, it could even the playing field for other major players in the global economy to retain their position. And this assuages the fears of the West, because then China will turn out to be the paper tiger that they hope them to be, too ambitious to stay afloat. However, this hope is a long-standing trope that has yet to prove true, and many economists caution against premature celebration and relaxation of the US economy, citing that Chinese tenacity has always proved resilient against economic forces. And in most cases, the call is just not to underestimate China with this term peak China. It is way too early to be conclusive. So here are arguments against peak China. First, we'll be going to the neo-realist point of view, where it may reorder the power hierarchy. So higher education as a soft power is highly sought after, but has become entrenched in existing international hierarchies. In general, ASEAN countries tend to be positioned less favorably in the international order, and hence they see China, a growing alternative, as a major priority. China itself has a wide array of educational institutions, most of which are very open to international students, particularly from Southeast Asia. The availability of middle to high school education, plus vocational and degree education, allows ASEAN countries to reliably develop their students and knowledge societies. So by positioning itself as a rising knowledge society and a prime destination for quality higher education in the region, China makes itself an irreplaceable and immovable asset to Southeast Asian countries as a major source of development and growth. Countries would rely on China for these benefits, and so China gains influence over the entire region, and cements itself as a dominant force. Inadvertently, this also leads to another established hierarchical pattern of regionalism in Southeast Asia, instead now with China as its head. Educational relations are also beneficial to China, specifically in the case of Singapore and Malaysia, where these countries import complete packages of educational programs from major English-speaking countries, and so Chinese students have some access to courses that are otherwise unavailable to them as a result of racial and political tension. So educational ties to Singapore and Malaysia can be a strategic boon for Chinese students to diversify and learn, bypassing frosty relations with the West. From the liberal perspective, there are more avenues for international and regional cooperation. So, establishing governing bodies and mechanisms for educational exchange, such as the Association of Pacific Rim Universities or the University Mobility Credit Transfer Schemes, ensures smoother applications for international students between China and ASEAN. And such infrastructure is a key indicator of the level of relation between countries and is a sure gateway into further cooperation in other sectors. For one, we open educational doorways for greater problem solving. Vietnamese students can solve Chinese problems, Chinese students can address problems in Thailand, and so on. The ability to collaborate, research, and innovate internationally becomes a much easier possibility with the prospect of educational relationships. A possible liberal perspective would say that these relationships are the bedrock of rising regional cooperation and an opportunity for Southeast Asian countries to participate and benefit from China's increasing influence over education. Southeast Asia has also been facing increasing pressure to regionalize, to combat and resist common threats such as environmental degradation and transboundary health problems, a theme that is seen in the ASEAN Charter. And hence, cooperation becomes an ever more important need for ASEAN, enabled by higher education. And lastly, we have a constructivist perspective as well, where higher education can directly influence norms. And this helps to combat the cultural and economic hegemony of the West over what it means to be developed. Right, the struggle to reinvent and reinstate state identities in the international order is something that is shared, a cultural similarity between Southeast Asian countries and China. In China, we see a struggle against the history of subordination to the West and their whims and wants. And in Southeast Asia, we see similar, though softer, may be softer anti-colonial sentiments, each country themselves being past colony. Arguably, development and education are an opportunity to defy these histories and present these countries on the international stage in a different, more reputable light. The Southeast Asian states are also still able to react and exert a measure of influence against the international order. In fact, regionalized, the regional entity can propose even greater freedom against the established and potentially limiting international order. Next, we have also the spreading of the Chinese language and how international students can also become vehicles of soft power. Right, these two prospects affect the evolution of norms in the host countries. As international students bring new ideas, they bring a small taste of their home countries into the mix, slowly shifting the norms and rules in a society to accommodate their presence. And the spread of the Chinese language also acts as a doorway for the inflow of Chinese cultures into other societies, as it brings its own descriptions, its own work ethic, and its own expectations. So in conclusion, propagating education has been a larger and greater long-term avenue for increasing China's influence and power by entrenching itself in other nations, regionally and internationally. Big China may hold some truth about the vertical dimension of growth, but not the horizontal dimension. Rather than developing its influence economically, China is spreading its influence laterally, creating a safety net of interconnected relationships across regions. Even if China's economy should begin to fall, its far-reaching and ever more entrenched position will protect it still.